Welcome back to Movies TV Mad and Wednesday's edition of the Movies TV Mad Daily. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. So shall we begin with our updates? Let's do this. The Suicide Squad proves WB learnt the wrong lessons from BVS. I haven't read this article, I never pre-read the articles, but the headline looks interesting. Warner Brothers made massive changes to their DCEU plans after Batman v Superman, but the Suicide Squad shows they learned all the wrong lessons. By Stephen M. Colbert. Now you've got to understand what kind of frame and what kind of perspective Colbert is coming from. You see, it's like politics. When the president makes a mistake, his opponents are going to jump on it. Because James Gunn's The Suicide Squad failed at the box office, the people supporting Restore the Snyderverse are going to jump on WB. So you've got to understand where this article's coming from. Despite its positive reception and high Rotten Tomatoes score, The Suicide Squad is failing to meet expectations at the box office, proving Warner Brothers' extreme reaction to Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice initial reception was misguided. WB's plans for DC films have been all over the place due to their failure to learn the right lessons from Batman vs Superman's Rotten Tomatoes score and box office, putting the DCEU into an extended state of disarray. After Batman v Superman landed a shockingly low score on Rotten Tomatoes and saw a big drop-off in its second weekend at the box office, despite a record-setting opening weekend, WB panicked. They delayed the start of Justice League's principal photography, which was set to shoot immediately after Batman v Superman, from Zack Snyder and Chris Terrio to rewrite the script, while also ordering last-minute rewrites and reshoots on David Ayer's Suicide Squad to add more humour, starting a chain reaction the DCEU has been unable to recover from as WB continues to try to escape the shadow of the Snyder era. Now, 5 years later, the consequences of that failed strategy are only becoming more apparent. WB executives at the time were envious of Marvel's flawless record on Rotten Tomatoes and consistent box office hauls, not understanding that the MCU's consistently high review scores were only a symptom of the MCU's success, while the actual cause was Kevin Feige's franchise-building savvy. If they really wanted to learn the right lessons from Batman vs Superman, they should have looked to how Feige was patient as he established the MCU's foundations and demonstrated confidence in his creatives and generated excitement for the larger MCU plan. Instead, WB is producing movies like The Suicide Squad that generate positive reactions on release, but fail to justify their own budgets or drive excitement for what's coming next. Now actually, I wasn't sure if I was going to agree with Stephen here, but I think that I do. It's very, very interesting. In the early days of the MCU, Kevin Feige was under extreme pressure. The fans were not happy. And even when Disney bought the franchise, Marvel Studios should I say, they stuck with him. They believed in what he was doing, and they were right, and his plans paid fruition. Now, the quick reaction from the reaction of BVS to change things very quickly was very, very reactive, but the reaction was so volatile they didn't know what to do next, and they were very, very worried. They should have had faith in their creative, but they didn't. Instead of focusing on building their film universe, DC tried to emulate Marvel movies, reportedly chasing Humer's style of Deadpool and Guardians of the Galaxy with the reshoots ordered for David Ayer's Suicide Squad, and later by literally hiring the man who directed the first two Avengers movies and shepherded the MCU through Phase 2, Joss Whedon, to turn Zack Snyder's principal photography into something more tonally in line with Whedon's MCU work. Every single one of these tactics failed at getting WB what they really wanted. Suicide Squad still got lambasted by critics, scoring an even lower Rotten Tomatoes score than Batman v Superman, and then Justice League scored yet another rotten score, on the tomato meter and was the DCEU's lowest grossing movie to date, when its most expensive movie yet and should have been the franchise's crowning achievement. Bringing together DC's biggest heroes, Wonder Woman and Aquaman were well reviewed and very financially successful, but both are ultimately products of the Snyder era WB was trying to escape. Right, let's dial back on this a little bit because he misses out Suicide Squad's box office. In fact, both Suicide Squad and Wonder Woman 2017 did really well in the box office. I would argue to say that Aquaman really isn't part of the Snyder era. Now, someone dialed me back the other day in the comments saying that, yeah, well, James Wan asked Zack Snyder's advice, and that's understandable, seeing that Zack kind of envisioned an Aquaman movie. It was him who went on a podcast, and the podcasters were laughing about doing an Aquaman movie because no one has ever taken Aquaman seriously pre that movie. And he said, I promise you, you will be taking him seriously after you see him in Justice League and his own movie. And he was proven right. But just because James Wan was asking advice, it doesn't make it Snyder's vision or part of Snyder's vision. In fact, the Aquaman movie has very little to do with Snyder's DCEU vision. In fact, they tried to dial away from it as much as possible. But basically, their plan to change kind of the tone, basically the tonal shift of this first Suicide Squad movie worked to the tune of 745 million. Wonder Woman 2017 again made lots of money. Now that Suicide Squad movie and the Wonder Woman movie were part and are part of the Snyderverse, even though people interfered. I think they even interfered with Wonder Woman 2017 a little bit, but that movie really worked. I still think that Wonder Woman 2017 is more Zack's vision than Patty Jenkins' vision. But it's very important to make the point that after they interfered with Suicide Squad, that movie may have been lambasted by critics, but it still made a hell of a lot of money. The DCEU eventually put together a couple of back-to-back movies with high Rotten Tomato scores, but the box office had all but disappeared compared to the franchise's early installments. Shazam and Birds of Prey are two of the DCEU's best reviewed movies, but also represent the franchise's lowest grossing movies so far. But this is where his agenda comes in, because Shazam made twice its box office. As I said yesterday, or whenever I said it, they knew that Shazam wasn't a very popular character, a grade Z character. So they put a little budget in there and they made money. Families and children loved the Shazam movie, so you can't lump it in with Birds of Prey. Other than the Suicide Squad, in fact, while there's really no hard correlation between the DCEU's Rotten Tomato scores and box office, every single movie directed by or developed under Zack Snyder era earned more at the box office than every single movie had since he left. Other than Zack Snyder's Justice League, which didn't get a theatrical release and still has no official performance numbers from HBO Max. But we know that Zack Snyder's Justice League Snyder Cut is the most successful streaming event of all time. We don't need the numbers, we know it. It's hard to know how Wonder Woman 1984 would have been received at the box office if it didn't land in the middle of a pandemic, but it may not have made a huge difference, since the conversation around that movie is highlighted by its massive Rotten Tomatoes drop after release. Wonder Woman 84 may have been a boon for HBO Max, but otherwise there's not much to write home about, and it's been mostly forgotten less than a year later. It's not a good movie, but it did do well for them on HBO Max, and you can't just forget about that. That's important because it's still money in the pocket of Warner Brothers Pictures. Then came the Suicide Squad. While hiring a former Marvel director didn't work for Justice League, Whedon arguably didn't have as much to work with since he took over late in production and wasn't able to craft the movie from ground up. So Warner Brothers tried again with James Gunn. To be fair to WB and Gunn, they got exactly what they wanted in a Suicide Squad movie, drawing huge praise from critics and debuting to a 100% Rotten Tomatoes score before settling down to the DCEU's second highest score at 91%, just below Wonder Woman. Unfortunately, the Rotten Tomatoes scores didn't translate into box office success like Wonder Woman 1984. We'll never know what the Suicide Squad would have done financially if it weren't for the pandemic, although brushing the box office aside as an unavoidable casualty of coronavirus would miss some other important factors, namely the second weekend box office drop. Now this is important. Why is this important? Because we know that Jungle Cruise has held much better than the Suicide Squad. And yes, it's R-rated, but still a rating of a movie is a suggestion who can watch it. There's no one standing at the door saying, you're too young, you can't get in. It's not like buying a packet of cigarettes in your local off-licence. So, this movie should have done a hell of a lot more, even with the Delta variant of the COVID pandemic. So it is a bit of a mystery, because it is a very good film. But I don't think it's as much of a mystery as we think, because I explained it yesterday. There wasn't an appetite for another Suicide Squad movie. Once you've seen one Suicide Squad movie, you've seen them all. The best place for this franchise is on HBO Max, and I think that's one lesson WB have learned. While total box office never had much of a chance, which is why the film was simultaneously released on HBO Max, the drop-off from the opening weekend to the second weekend is a proportional number, and the Suicide Squad's second weekend drop wasn't just the highest drop in the history of the DCEU, even higher than Batman v Superman's second weekend drop that initially caused Warner Brothers to basically detonate their franchise plans, but also the highest second weekend drop for any post-pandemic blockbuster. Despite the high Rotten Tomatoes score, the Suicide Squad actually got the exact same B+ cinema score as the original Suicide Squad, just above the B earned by Batman v Superman. Cinema score isn't the most scientific tool, it's not, and I don't know why it's used, by the way. Where are we? A score isn't the most scientific tool, as it's just an in-person survey conducted randomly on a movie's opening night, but it is generally accepted as an indicator of a movie's reception by a general audience, and therefore word of mouth, which is a major factor in second weekend box office drops. This is interesting. I think these ratings, these movie grades and ratings should be abolished, because we know the general audience haven't exactly got great taste in movies. Because if you go and watch BVS and you think it's the worst movie ever, I mean, I have to ask you a few questions. If it's not your cup of tea, that's one thing. I think a B rating is pretty cool. I mean, I think that's an accurate summation of what a broader audience would think of the film. It's very indie, the pacing's slow at the beginning. It may not have been the film that was marketed. WB made mistakes with the marketing. They tried to pretend it was a popcorn chomping beat 'em up between Batman and Superman. If they were honest with the marketing, like Fox were with Logan, I think we would have had different results. Despite having the colour and humour, and especially the Rotten Tomatoes score, WB was looking for all along. It's still underperformed, even by pandemic box office standards. It's hard to condemn a movie's financial performance with so many circumstances at play outside the filmmaker and studio's control. But the only positive spin to be put on the Suicide Squad's performance is that it's doing well on HBO Max, which could be even more profitable than theatres. That's what I said to you. They've already made their money. They don't care. Streaming is the future, and we know that. But it is a bit of a mystery why people didn't go out to support the movie. But is it? Is there the hunger for a Suicide Squad movie? Another one? I don't think so. With no interconnectivity and people being told it's a standalone movie, people thought, why should I bother? Because interconnectivity is what people want. Now, many Harley stans tell me, we don't want interconnectivity, we'd rather it be like kind of standalone like it is. Yeah, because all you care about is Harley Quinn and these Suicide Squad characters. But the broader audience want to see a connective tissue to these franchises. And that's why from The Flash, that's exactly what we're going to get. And it doesn't matter whether you want it or not. It's about the broader audience, not you. So where are we? And studios control, but the only positive spin to be put on the Suicide Squad's performance is that it's doing well on HBO Max, which could be even more profitable than theatres. But it's still doubtful WB's thrilled with the Suicide Squad's box office. Who would be? Who would be thrilled? But I think they knew what was coming with the projections of 33 million. Now, they were wrong about that, but they weren't wrong by much. Let's be honest about that at least. Ever since the release of Batman v Superman, WB has been pushing for light-hearted movies and adding humour to their films, which I disagree with, by the way, seemingly to more closely match the tone of the MCU, as detractors have demanded for years. Zack Snyder says they were obsessed with making Justice League funnier. While nothing is inherently wrong with comedic tones, fans who had bought into the DCEU at that point were on board with the tone and story being told so far. So the drastic shift away from that only alienated the franchise's biggest supporters while failing to grow a new audience enthusiastic for the new direction. In fact, it turns out tone wasn't a problem for the franchise at all. After Todd Phillips struggled to get Joker off the ground, with W being famously concerned about their ability to sell Joker pyjamas, Joker went on to become one of the highest grossing DC films yet. Despite being one of the darkest, and the studio didn't even see all the profit after selling off a large share of the film outside to financiers. Listen, if I was WB, I would have been nervous about Joker. I would have been. Even with Todd Phillips and Joaquin, leading that film, I would have been nervous. And nobody knew it was going to make as much as it did. So they sold some of the movie off. These things happen all the time. And I know some people throw that at the studio, but they still made a big profit. It's the most profitable movie, DC movie, it's the most profitable CBM, comic book movie of all time. And that's a fact. Nobody knew that this film was going to hit so hard, but it did. Now, years later, Zack Snyder's Justice League is out, representing Snyder's original vision for Justice League, and it's even more confusing why Warner Brothers pulled the fire alarm and abandoned his direction. The movie's far lighter than Batman v Superman, and there's plenty of humour that lands even better than anything inserted by Joss Whedon's reshoots. It's interesting, because I don't think the Snyder Cut is Zack's scary idea like he told us about at SnyderCon. But yeah, he was able to lighten it up, but still keep his compelling tone. Just shows you how talented Snyder is. While also adding Darkseid and some of the most impressive comic book movie moments, particularly Flash's time travel moment at the end of the final battle. Other than its 4-hour runtime, the movie delivers on everything Warner Brothers wanted back in 2016. The only problem is now it's no longer part of their plan, and Warner Brothers CEO Ann Sarnoff came out immediately after the Snyder Cut's release to say they're not going to continue that story or do any more DC movies with Zack Snyder. Just as an interest in his plan, the one WB failed to stand behind or promote back in 2016-2017 is at an all-time low. Shortly after WB ordered the first of many alterations to Zack Snyder's Justice League plans and Suicide Squad's reshoots, it was already apparently the course corrections were too extreme. In June 2016, Zack Snyder's director's cut of Batman v Superman, the 3-hour Ultimate Edition, was released, clarifying plot details and adding more character development, and is almost universally considered the superior version of the film. Then in May 2017, Wonder Woman was released. Snyder was heavily involved, fact. In Wonder Woman's early development, bringing in Alan Heinberg to help him develop the story and have him write the screenplay before Patty Jenkins was hired as director. Jenkins worked closely with Snyder but made the film her own. Stephen, this is not her movie. Right, Stephen, let's just put that down for a minute. There's more to come on that. If this is Patty Jenkins, if Patty Jenkins made Wonder Woman 2017 her own, why did she take the sequel as far away from that movie as possible? Because it wasn't her own. The movie that's her own is Wonder Woman 84, and you've just said yourself that's not a very good movie. Proof that Patty Jenkins should never touch the DCEU again. Right. Snyder as a producer, along with his wife Deborah Snyder and their producing partner Wes Collar. Jenkins also brought several of Snyder's most frequent collaborators onto the crew. Wonder Woman would go on to become one of the highest rated comic book movies of all time on Rotten Tomatoes, and still holds the DCEU's title for top earner at the domestic box office. The DCEU's, but not DC's, as I said. Joker movie is the most profitable CBM of all time. In their desire to emulate the MCU's success with the DCEU, they ignored how Marvel actually started the MCU, particularly in how they handled their own early stumbles, particularly in Phase 1 with the Incredible Hulk's muted critical reception, or the criticism of Iron Man 2 overstuffed universe-building plot. In fact, several MCU Phase 1 movies fell far short of the box office expectations held for the MCU today. This is what I've said already. Captain America, the First Avenger 4 and the Incredible Hulk are still among the MCU's lowest earners, but Captain America and Thor would go on to see much more lucrative sequels. While Hulk is still caught in the character's rights limbo, Kevin Feige may have made some minor adjustments to account for lessons learned during Phase 1, but he didn't throw out the whole plan and call for massive overhauls to their approach. Even after Avengers Age of Ultron got negative feedback, for the confusing dream sequence and future setup, Marvel didn't decide to just abandon plans to bring Thanos into the MCU or forget about the Infinity Stones altogether, as WB did with many of Snyder's story threads, like the Nightmare timeline setup. The benefit of sticking to a plan, even if it isn't a home run, is that the larger universe is allowed to actually build into a larger payoff, as we finally saw with Zack Snyder's Justice League. Continually changing focus loses that synergy and fails to build as much audience investment from film to film. This is a bloody good article, by the way. And I say this is a man who blocked me ages ago, but that's because I fell out with his mate Davey Pienaar, so I don't think it was anything. Or maybe I quote tweeted him too and I annoyed him. I'm always constructive when I disagree, but these people can't handle disagreement. The indecision around how to move forward with the DCEU was more than if they'd simply confidently moved forward with an imperfect plan. Marvel had announced their upcoming Phase 2 and 3 lineups leading to Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, announced simply as Infinity War Part 1 and 2, officially confirming the whole thing was leading to Thanos and the Infinity Gauntlet in a giant crossover. Meanwhile, Zack Snyder had a plan charting out DC's own massive crossover finale, defending the Earth from Darkseid and the forces of Apocalypse. But the nature of the plan was never made clear at the time, and the franchise was criticised for not following a plan like the MCU, all while a fairly detailed outline of the whole story had been sketched out on whiteboards in Zack Snyder's WB offices. With Jim Lee and Jeff Johns, the fact that Darkseid was ever going to be in Justice League wasn't even known until it was revealed by a leaked storyboard months after the theatrical cut hit theatres. Even if WB still found it absolutely necessary to pivot away from Snyder without finishing his plan, they needed to show public commitment to another plan and move forward with that to instill confidence in the brand. Instead, it's been mixed messages, repeated false starts, announcements for films that never got off the ground, and changes in strategy such that now, 5 years later, the DCEU hasn't done anything to actually move past the events of Justice League, both in universe and in real life. Who's to know how things would have played out if WB stuck to their guns after Batman vs Superman came out? Maybe minor changes still would have been necessary down the road, but they could have avoided the drama and embarrassment of major fan campaigns like Release the Snyder Cut and Release the Air Cut, and restore the Snyderverse, serving as constant reminders of their 2016 mistakes. In fact, Snyder's entire arc would have been completed by now, with Snyder likely moving to other projects and leaving the future of the franchise to another filmmaker. As for the Suicide Squad, its box office haul may not be the worst problem in the world, provided it does its job to grow subscriptions for HBO Max, and let's not forget sponsorships. But Warner Brothers' decision to detonate the original franchise plans after Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice to chase better Rotten Tomato scores only got them better reviewed movies that don't sell as many tickets as the original slate, or generate demand for the sequels and spin-offs expected from a modern franchise film. Darkseid's impending invasion and Batman's post-apocalyptic Nightmare timeline be damned. It's a very, very good article by Stephen Colbert, and it's full of so many truths. They should have stuck to their guns. Like, Bob Iger is so clever. And we didn't have someone clever running Warner Brothers at the time. We had Kevin Sugihara, and he was simply reactive, constantly chasing the money, chasing the dream. And as Steven says, the reason the MCU is so successful today, because they believed in Kevin Feige, and they had every reason to believe in Kevin Feige. Kevin Feige created a franchise that's like a movie series, a TV series with Kevin Feige, its showrunner. It created something, and everyone's chasing that success, and nobody, probably apart from the Fast and the Furious franchise, has really found that kind of success. It's so difficult to create that successful franchise because it's different to the franchises we grew up with in the 80s and the 90s. This is a continuing saga, and Kevin Feige continues to pull it off, and Zack Snyder could have pulled it off if they were patient. And what did they do afterwards? Oh, continuity doesn't work. A continuing strand doesn't work. Let's make everything stand alone. Now, Shazam and Aquaman did well and were well received. There's no question about that. But standalone movies like Birds of Prey, which is not the greatest movie in the world, didn't make any money. Wonder Woman 84 made money on HBO Max, but as Steven said again, it's dropped from its high score on Rotten Tomatoes initially, shows that people didn't like the movie. And I don't think, without a pandemic box office, I think if we were in a normal times, I think Wonder Woman 84 would have flopped like James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. And James Gunn's The Suicide Squad is a fabulous movie, but it's a movie really nobody asked for. But they did what they did with Joss Whedon. They went and got an MCU director, hoping the director could bring people in. So this was never their plan. As I've said to you, all the movies since really since Justice League, all the rest of the movies have been placeholders, because Walter Hamada came in and he had his Worlds of DC multiverse strategy from 2018, from the moment he came in. And his plan is what we're going to see in The Flash. From The Flash onwards, that's Walter Hamada's plan. And we're going to have to wait and see if it's successful. But a very good article speaking many, many truths. Ray Fisher is back with the vengeance. Ray Fisher won't play Cyborg again until WB apologises for Justice League. Justice League Ray Fisher says he still wants Warner Brothers to apologise for the investigation of Joss Whedon's abusive behaviour by Grant Hermans of Screen Rant. Kneel before Fisher! Justice League's Ray Fisher says he still wants Warner Brothers to apologise for the investigation of Joss Whedon's abusive behaviour, and after making a cameo appearance in Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice, Fisher would make his proper film debut with Justice League, starring a former college athlete, Victor Stone, as he's cybernetically reconstructing following a near-fatal car accident by his father, and the alien technology of the mother boxes. Stone would be recruited by Bruce Wayne and Diana Prince to join the titular superhero team and protect the Earth against Steppenwolf and his army of parademons before they can terraform the planet and make way for the supervillain Darkseid. Production on Justice League became one of the most infamous in Hollywood, with original director Zack Snyder departing following the death of his daughter and a slew of creative differences with WB. Whedon was subsequently brought on to finish the film, instead choosing to rewrite and reshoot a large portion of it to meet WB mandates for a brighter tone and shorter runtime. They would still ultimately see mixed reception from critics and audiences alike and bomb at the box office, losing the studio reported $60 million. Following years of fans' campaigns for Snyder to be allotted to restore his exercise footage and vision and reports of Whedon's abusive behaviour during reshoots, WB would reunite with the director for Zack Snyder's Justice League, a 4-hour version of the film that would receive generally positive reviews from critics and acclaim from audiences. During an appearance at MegaCon 2021 in Orlando, Florida, Fisher was asked by the No Load Time podcast about his potential return to the DCEU. The actor stated that while he loves the character of Cyborg and the DC world, he is still disappointed at how WB and Walter Hamada publicly handled their investigation into Fisher's abuse claims against Whedon during reshoots on Justice League, and that the first step to rebuilding that bridge with the studios would be an apology. See what Fisher said below. That's a complicated question. I think ultimately how people spend their money determines what happens and what does not happen in this business, and particularly in comic books and DC. For me, there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Obviously, I've not been shy about talking about all of the things that have occurred over the last year. The back and forth that I've had personally and publicly with Warner Brothers Pictures, Walter Hamada and the rest of the crew over there. For me, I think it all starts with an apology coming from Warner Brothers' side of things. There's a lot of really gnarly stuff that has gone down, especially publicly. What Walter Hamada and Warner Brothers Pictures attempted to do professionally and personally during one of the most crucial years for black people in the history of really humanity is just unacceptable. So until such time an apology is issued, I definitely will not be supporting any Walter Hamada Productions, period. It's a tough thing because I'm a DC fan through and through. I love these characters, but sometimes you've got to give up what you love to do what's right. I'll react to it, don't worry. The entirety of the battle between Fisher, WB and DC Films has been one of the more complicated in film history, that initially split the public down the middle over which side to take seriously. As further reports came out from Fisher and co-stars Jason Momoa and Gal Gadot As well from Whedon's beloved series Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, public opinion generally shifted towards siding with the star. Even those who may have been unsure about Fisher's case due to the lack of details generally sympathised with the actor for WB's near slanderous approach to defending themselves. While Justice League and Snyder's extended edition weren't the end of Fisher's career, it certainly was supposed to be a springboard to launch the stage actor to big screen stardom. Given the in-production DCEU film, The Flash was supposed to include Fisher's cyborg, and the actor remains hopeful to return to the character in the future. Many are currently hopeful WB will begin building a new bridge with Fisher, especially as he's now offered what the first step would be in repairing the relationship. Only time will tell what the future holds for Fisher, Cyborg and the larger DCEU. Very, very interesting. Listen, we've spoke about this so many times, and I know there's many of you triggered by Ray Fisher, and sometimes I'm triggered by him myself. Here's the thing. I understand where he's coming from. I really, really do. I believe him. I've always believed him. And I think, listen, Ray Fisher wants to change the industry. He won't. He will never change this industry. However it looks like it's changing with Me Too and Time's Up, it hasn't. They're just optics. Everything is optics with big business. There will always be toxicity on the set. The talent will always be treated badly by some people. It's just the way it is. Ray Fisher was right to speak out against Joss Whedon and what happened. Then he made it personal against Walter Hamada rather than Warner Brothers. But I believe him that they tried to block the investigation, and I get that. I really do. And as I say, there's been times where I've been kind of, oh Ray, please give it a rest. But I understand where he's coming from. Now, what is the next step? Listen, Warner Brothers want him in The Flash. There's no question. They want to sync everything up because it's still kind of the Snyderverse-y thing at the beginning of The Flash. It's continuing. And then Barry Allen, and probably actually Grant Gusting's Barry Allen and Ezra Miller's Barry Allen will run together and reboot the multiverse. That's the plan. Then Ray Fisher won't matter anymore because if he's not there, he's not there. They don't have to use him after the reboot. So that's handy for them, but they would have liked him at the beginning part of the movie, maybe sharing more of the adventure with Ray Fisher's Cyborg. Because originally, one of the plans for one of the directors, creators of the Flash movie was a buddy-buddy movie with Ray Fisher's Cyborg and Ezra Miller's The Flash, which I really would have enjoyed. So it'd be interesting to see how much of Cyborg we would have got in this Flash movie. Now the question is, are Warner Brothers going to bend the knee after all this time? We've been in production of The Flash since April, so that's May, June, July, August, we're in the 4th month. I don't think it's finishing anytime soon. By the way, Shazam! Fury of the Gods is nearly finished, but Flash is a huge movie. I can't wait to see it. But there's still a way they can put him in the movie. Obviously, it's not the bigger role we would have liked for him to have. I mean, it's difficult now, isn't it? But has he got a future in the DCEU? Again, I don't know. Will they apologise to him? Listen, I don't think they are going to apologise to him. I think it's done. It's very, very sad that it's done. Ray Fisher delivered a fantastic performance in Zack Snyder's Justice League Snyder Cut, and it's a big shame. It's a big shame this has happened. Ray took a position, Warner Brothers took a position, they tried to protect themselves, they asked him to throw Joss Whedon under the bus and leave Toby Emmerich and Jeff Johns alone. Ray wasn't willing to do that, and we are where we are now, but I just think we're not going to get Ray Fisher in The Flash, which is a shame. I was hoping, because I even said to you I had hopes of it happening, but I think it probably is too late in the day now, and that's a shame. But if Warner Brothers could apologise to him, even if they don't mean it, just to get him in a segment of the movie, that would make me very, very happy. But let me just say this to Ray Fisher. You are not hurting Warner Brothers or Walter Hamada. The only people who are going to be hurt by you not being in the Flashpoint movie are the fans. Now, I think we've all seen the Suicide Squad by now, so there will be spoilers in this article. Jay Courtney interested in Captain Boomerang spin-off movie or TV show. Let me be absolutely clear. James Gunn really did Jay Courtney's Captain Boomerang dirty. This was one of the best characters in the 2016 movie, and I enjoyed what he got given, very little, in James Gunn's movie. But there's no way you should be killing him off so soon. Very, very disappointing. The Suicide Squad star Jay Courtney says he's interested in doing a Captain Boomerang spin-off movie or TV show, or maybe even a Flash cameo by Dan Sinski of Screen Rant. Following contains spoilers for the Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad star Jay Courtney wants to do a Captain Boomerang spin-off movie or TV show. Courtney first played the bank robber turned Suicide Squadder in David Ayer's 2016 film. Captain Boomerang not only survived the first film, he was one of only 4 characters chosen to return for 2021's The Suicide Squad. Why have him return? For what? I reckon that Jay must have thought, Jesus Christ, I've really wasted my time here. Captain Boomerang's return would unfortunately prove to be shockingly short-lived. One of the first team of Task Force X members to hit the beach in Corto Maltese in the Suicide Squad's action-packed opening. Boomerang is picked off by the local military along with several other team members. Writer-director James Gunn did obviously promise a high body count before the movie release, but that hasn't stopped Captain Boomerang fans from lamenting his ridiculously brief appearance in the film. It is ridiculous. It is, absolutely. Don't agree with it. Of course, DC could always make it up to Boomerang's angry fans by giving him a spin-off, and it seems Courtney himself would be down for such a project. Appearing on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon, Courtney addressed the fans calling for Captain Boomerang to return and expressed his strong interest in making that happen. Let's do it. Get on with it. Let's go. Give the people what they want. Absolutely. Listen, I was saying a Boomerang always comes back. Now, I think there's opportunities galore with him. We could do all of it. TV series spin-off, pop-up in the Flash, Warner Brothers are out there. They know what's up. There is, of course, already one upcoming The Suicide Squad spin-off in the works, as John Cena's Peacemaker is set to return for an HBO Max show, written and partly directed by Gunn himself. HBO Max obviously opens up loads of possibilities for DC spin-offs, much in the way Disney Plus has opened the door on multiple Marvel and Star Wars shows. Captain Boomerang unfortunately doesn't seem like a character who would be high priority when it comes to developing more projects. I tell you what, I'd be more interested in seeing a Captain Boomerang spin-off than a Peacemaker spin-off. That's my opinion. Harley Quinn, Bloodsport, Ratcatcher 2 and even King Shark feel like characters who would be more worth revisiting. Just among those who survived. The Suicide Squad Boomerang, of course, did not survive, and even among the deceased characters who could be brought back in prequel form, he would certainly take a backseat to Polka Dot Man and perhaps Javelin and Savan. No. I'd rather see Captain Boomerang than any of the new characters that James Gunn created. And we'll talk about Ratcatcher in a moment. In the next article. The idea of Captain Boomerang making a cameo appearance in The Flash, as Courtney has suggested more than once, seems like the longest shot of all, given how stuffed with DC characters that multiverse spawning movies already is. One more character isn't going to hurt, is it? Though Captain Boomerang doesn't leap to the front of the list, he leaps in front of my list when it comes to DC characters who warrant further exploration via spin-off. It's still not out of the realm of possibility that he could make his way back at some point. After all, a Peacemaker spin-off seemed unlikely going into the Suicide Squad, yet he's getting one. It's always possible there's someone high up at DC or Warner Brothers who loves them some Captain Boomerang, and can't wait to see what else the character can get up to. He does have plenty of colourful unexplored backstory to delve into, so maybe the Suicide Squad won't be the last time audiences ever see Courtney as Boomerang. After all, we talk about copying the MCU, but Captain Boomerang is a fucking perfect character. He's got humour, he has arrogance, he has everything to make the audience really excited to see more of him. And I would love to see more of Jay Courtney's Captain Boomerang. The Suicide Squad set up a spin-off for the wrong character. The Suicide Squad sets up a spin-off show for John Cena's Peacemaker, but he isn't the Task Force X member most deserving of an HBO Max series by James Hunt of Screen Rant. John Cena's Peacemaker spin-off is set up by the Suicide Squad, but he's not the character most deserving of getting his own show. As well as bringing back some characters from the 2016 movie, the Suicide Squad introduced several new characters to the DCEU. Of course, given this is Task Force X, many of those end up dead before the movie's end, and in a lot of cases before the end of the opening, but most of the survivors could have movie and show returns. While the futures of many Task Force X characters remains unclear, one has been confirmed even before the Suicide Squad was released. It was announced that James Gunn had written and directed an HBO Max show centered around Peacemaker, with Cena returning to star. Although Peacemaker appears to be killed by Bloodsport Idris Elba in the Suicide Squad, the post-credit scene shows that he miraculously survived and is being eyed to lead a new mission to save the world. Correction, save the fucking world. That directly leads into his own show titled Peacemaker, which will release on HBO Max in 2022, but it doesn't mean it was the right choice. As a character, Peacemaker is entertaining and humorous, not least thanks to Cena's game performance, but he's far from the Suicide Squad's best or most interesting. His peace at all costs approach leads to him feeling a little one-note, with less depth than some of the other characters. While that would mean a spin-off can flesh him out more, it also means it isn't as appealing as a show focused on another character. Most specifically, Ratcatcher 2, played by Daniela Melchior. Ratcatcher is the very heart of the movie and the absolute standout among the cast. Melchior isn't as big a name as Cena, but her performance is not only key to the character working, but means she deserves a return. I'll give you my opinion on this because I think you know how much I love Daniela's performance and character. Ratcatcher 2, I'd marry that character. Not Daniela, although she's nice. I'd marry Ratcatcher 2 because she's an awesome character, but doesn't mean I think a spin-off with Ratcatcher 2 would work, and I'll explain why after the article. Accompanied by Sebastian is one of the Suicide Squad's biggest surprises, a minor character who could easily have been among the many casualties of the opening massacre. She wins viewers over thanks to her inherent goodness, sweetness and sense of humour. The character is a stark contrast to most other Suicide Squad members, most of whom fall into the kind of morally grey territory. Seen with many an anti-hero over the years, Ratcatcher 2 feels like a different spin on that, and combined with her rather unique powers, which get one big moment to shine, but could be explored further, then there's definite scope for more. Peacemaker will span multiple timelines, showing the character's origin and his future, which is something that a Ratcatcher 2 spin-off could do too. Even though we kind of saw what we needed to see with Ratcatcher's origins, the little bit we saw of Taika Waititi playing her dad was really enough. We didn't really need to see more. Her future is wide open after the Suicide Squad, and that's more interesting than seeing what comes next for Peacemaker. I don't agree with that. By design, his future is likely a smaller scale Task Force X type deal, since he's being recruited by people working for Amanda Waller, Viola Davis. Ratcatcher 2 operating independently could just be about anything, showing her fighting crime as a vigilante while also trying to find her place in a world that rejects her. Similarly, by having Taika Waititi appear as the original Ratcatcher in a tear-jerking flashback cameo, you know what you could do? You could actually have Taika Waititi do his own prequel version of Ratcatcher. That would be interesting to me. Then there's basis for seeing more of her past too. Looking at how Ratcatcher came to be in the first place, and how she's assumed the mantle, Peacemaker will likely be a solid show, but Ratcatcher 2 returning could be much better. Right, let me give you my take on this, because what I feel about this is I don't know what else Ratcatcher 2 can really give us. She's nice, she's sweet, but what situations can we put her in? How many times can she control rats to solve a problem and not make it boring? Do you know what I mean? She's a great character, but her own show? No. I expect the surviving members to be involved somewhat within Peacemaker. I mean, I don't know about Harley Quinn. That'd be interesting because Margot Robbie is an A-list actress, so we'll see what happens there. But I think Daniela would be involved, and I think maybe even Idris's Bloodsport will be involved. They've already finished shooting that show, so we don't know what's going on there. It was never the intention of Gunn to give you everything from Peacemaker in the Suicide Squad. You're going to get to know him. He's got a very tragic past, and you're going to have empathy with him. This was the right decision. I love Daniela Melchior's Ratcatcher 2, but her own movie, her own show, no. But her cameoing in other people's shows and films, definitely the right decision. For me, the Suicide Squad should stick to HBO Max and never be involved cinematically again. Well, last night was the dramatic conclusion of Superman and Lois's first season. As you all know, I have not had access to this show. I mean, I shouldn't have been watching it from the beginning because the way I was watching it wasn't right. But I stopped having access to this show on episode 5, and I haven't been able to see it since. So I don't know what happened in the season finale. I will buy the Blu-ray, I will buy it on Prime Video. So until I can do that, I'm as much in the dark as a lot of other people. It hasn't even been released in the UK yet. But we're going to read an article full of spoilers. They do talk to the showrunner about the season and the season finale. So this is from Entertainment, and I'm very excited to read this article because the 5 episodes I saw, I was in love with them. They've done a great job with my character, and I'm so happy. I'm a little bit... They've still found a way to do Team Superman though, haven't they? Superman needs Lois, he needs, Steel, he needs his kids, which is a shame in a way, but I think the way they've done it this time kind of works. Superman and Lois boss breaks down spoilers, arrival, Tal-Rho's fate, and more. Showrunner Todd Helbing reveals that Superman's brother, Morgan Edge, Tal-Rho, almost transformed into another DC Comics villain by Chancellor Agard. Superman and Lois just staged an unexpected family reunion and could have implications for the Arrowverse as a whole. No, it's gonna have implications for the whole DC live action universe, the movies and the TV shows, not just Arrowverse. It's a much bigger world from Flash movie onwards. This is why it's exciting. There are good plans here, I promise you. In the CW Super Shows Season 1 finale, Lois Elizabeth Tulloch used the Tel-Lock device to enter and eradicated Jordan's Alex Garfield mind and help him overcome Zeta-Rho's possession. Meanwhile, Superman Tyler Hoechlin teamed up with Steel, aka John Henry Irons, Walt Parks, to depower Morgan Edge, Tal-Rho, Adam Rayner. By the way, round of applause for Adam Rayner, who's been a great villain this year. I tell you what, I think he's been just as good as Michael Shannon Zod. Very similar characters as well. And it's kind of a similar storyline as well, so I applaud his performance. Before he could execute his plan, once the dust settled, John Henry planned to leave Smallville and reunite with the Earth Prime version of his sister. But something stopped him in the final moments of the hour. Natalie Taylor Buck, the daughter he shared with Lois on another Earth, crash landed on the Smallville farm, which came as a shock to both John Henry and Lois. Natalie's arrival on Earth Prime not only raises questions for the Kent family, like how will Lois handle meeting her daughter from a parallel Earth. It's not really her daughter because it's not her, but I can see where they're going. It's complications and it's interesting. But also for the entire Arrowverse, does this mean it's once again possible to travel between parallel worlds? Yes, because the walls of the multiverse are cracking. This is going to be the whole theme of the Flash movie and going forward. It's very exciting if you're a DC fan. The shared universe's last major crossover, Crisis on Infinite Earths, ended with all the CW superhero shows except Stargirl moving to one planet, Earth Prime, and the rebirth of the multiverse, although the Arrowverse heroes are unaware of that latter part. Natalie showing up on Earth Prime months after her father, who wound up there during After Crisis, at least suggests the multiverse could come back into play in the Arrowverse. Again, it's not just Arrowverse, it's the whole of the DC multiverse. You've got to think bigger now with this multiverse strategy. Needing answers, EW hopped on the phone with showrunner Todd Helbing. By the way, Todd's done a tremendous job, as he did with The Flash, to discuss what Natalie's reunion with John Henry could mean for the multiverse, what his plans for Rayner's Tal-Rho are, and more. Entertainment Weekly, how much of this finale did you have planned from the beginning of the season? Is there we were always heading more or less? Todd Helbing. At the beginning of the season, you have a big tentpoles. That stuff always changes though. Inevitably, what always happens is that the ideas you had for, let's say, episode 10 get brought up to like episode 4. And at least in my experience, there may be other people out there who can map it out and stick to it. What happened on this show is when we watched the cut of episode 2, we realised that some stuff wasn't landing. So we did some reshoots and then we did some rewrites. And that sort of trickled down and has this snowball effect. So I think it's vastly different than what we originally thought it would be. Yeah, and I think part of what they thought it would be more crossovers with kind of the Arrowverse, but then he realised he wanted to not involve the rest of the Arrowverse too much, apart from the the John Diggle cameo. would be really the layout of the last 5 episodes was completely different. We didn't break the last 2 episodes, I think, until April. What did you originally think would be the final arc? It's so broad when you originally sit down to talk about a season. At the time when we were still doing 13 episodes, you still kind of think about it like 3 acts. There was Edge. We knew that John Henry Irons was going to team up with Superman and that whole family would be involved in this fight to save Smallville and the Cushings and all of our characters, but we really didn't know the ins and outs of how it would play. We know that Walt Parks wasn't always going to play Steel and was initially cast as a version of Lex Luthor. That's interesting, I didn't know that. In terms of Edge, did you always know he was going to be Superman's brother? When I originally pitched the season, that was always part of it, that we were going to explore this mythology that had never really been done before in live action. But originally we started doing the subjects, right? The Eradicator was brought up pretty early as a potential for Edge, but Daniel Cudmore played Subject 11, and so we were going to build up the Subject 17. There were different versions where Edge could become Subject 17 or other versions of it, but the Eradicator just felt right. Once we started diving into that mythology, it just seemed to work so much better. For a period, it felt like every superhero thing was drawing on the same 80s era of comics, but now we're starting to see things move away from that with Superman and Lois. You drew on the 90s with the introductions of Steel, the Eradicator, and even Jordan as a half-human, half-Kryptonian like Superboy. What drew you to all the material from that era? It always comes from how are we going to get the most emotion out of this family show. Anyway, we can loop family into it. That's our primary objective. That's where Edge is being his half-brother came from. But there is no specific era, I think, that we necessarily go into breaking episodes or a season thinking about. It's more about there are so many characters in Superman's world and we want to avoid some that we used on Supergirl. Obviously Morgan Edge was, but it really just comes from family is the real motivator and putting our own spin in the mythology for our show. If you're confused, we had the real Morgan Edge on the Supergirl show. The Morgan Edge we see on this show isn't Morgan Edge. He's actually a Kryptonian, just to be clear on that. In the finale, Jordan flies while possessed by Zeta Rho. Is that a skill he has now, or is that just a one-off? Well, I think we aren't going to be able... Say that again. Well, I think we aren't going to be able to forever do, oh, he gets a new power this week. But I think Jordan coming out of the finale is going to be a little bit more confident. Mentally, he defeated Zeta Rho, which, as Superman says about when Zod was in him, was extremely difficult. The fact that he did that, I think he's going to slowly start to understand how to use the powers. He has better and more frequently and developed some new ones. I still think that Jordan is being groomed to be a villain. And Jonathan will get powers and he'll be the hero. They're doing the Lex Clark Smallville thing. I'm sure of it. Not that they're ever going to admit it right now. How viable is Jordan and Sarah's Indy Navarrete relationship? She doesn't know about this major part of his life. What's always been interesting to us is to have the boys go through things that Clark went through when he lived in Smallville. But the times are just so different from when Clark grew up there. But there are these similar issues. You know, often when you're a teenager and you fall in love for the first time, you're like, oh my God, this is the person for me, laughs. And then that doesn't necessarily happen that way. I think Clark and Lois are going to have a lot of opinions about Jordan and revealing too much to Sarah in the next season. I could have predicted that myself. I was surprised Edge survived the finale. Will Adam Rayner return in season 2? This is good. It fixes the mistake of Man of Steel killing Zod. You want to bring Shannon Zod back again and again. You don't want to kill him off. So this is great. And as I expect him to say, they love the actor. We love Adam Rayner. He's such a great guy and an amazing actor he is. So we like this idea that Clark and Tal will have this sort of Thor Loki relationship. Yes, I like that. I like the way, I tell you, I love the way this guy thinks. So I think you'll see him again in one way or another also. Crisis on Infinite Earths ended with the multiverse being reborn, but none of the Arrowverse's heroes know that it's back. Does Natalie's late arrival in the finale imply that it is once again possible to travel between worlds? All I'll say is that there are a lot of questions out there right now about the Arrowverse and how it all works and is tied together. And I think in season 2 you'll get a lot more of those answers. But this goes beyond the Arrowverse, I can tell you that. And Todd Helbing, this showrunner, and other showrunners of Arrowverse shows are sitting in the big room with the movie people as well. This is what Ann Sarnoff's been talking about, the interconnectivity of the studio working with different departments. It's a great idea. How early on did you know you wanted to end the season with Natalie arriving on this Earth? When we started to develop what happened to Lois on John Henry Irons' planet, we always knew that he was going to have this redemption story, but the specific pieces of it and how it would unfold, that stuff all came pretty quickly. So we knew that we wanted Nat around pretty soon after we figured out the John Henry storyline. How does her arrival complicate things for the Kent family, especially for Lois? We get into that in the first episode of season 2. The thing that I love so much about this version of Lois Lane is you see all of her personal struggles, what she's overcome to be who she is. And I think we're going to reveal a lot more of that in season 2. So that is certainly a part of that. Can't wait. I've got to see the rest of the first season yet, ain't I? And I'm looking forward to season 2. What a nut job. In the penultimate episode, Tegan Kayla Heller tells Jordan that she moved to Smallville from Central City after her father went to jail. Was that just a harmless nod to the Flash, or is that indicative of future plans for meeting her father? Well, C laughs. In season 2, the audience will get a lot more answers about how this stuff all works together. And wow, that's the article. Listen, I love Superman. He's my favourite fictional character. He's fantastic. And what Todd Helbing has done, and Todd must stay and stay and stay and stay for the rest of this show's time. I don't want to lose this showrunner because he's so good. The Flash lost everything good it had when Todd left. There's no question about it. People say his final season wasn't great. I don't care. I don't care. He's a great storyteller and he's got great ideas, and I can't wait to see the rest of season 1 and start seeing season 2 whenever they release it. It's been a successful show, and for once we've got a bunch of Superman fans celebrating Superman live action together rather than having, you know, divisive different opinions about it. This is good. And if this is the way the DC live action universe is going to be, I mean, Titans season 3, everyone's loving Titans now. That's great. They're doing the Red Hood storyline. That's great. It's all coming together in TV. Now we want it to all come together with the movies. If I were you, and if I was any other DC fan, I'd be as excited as I am and others are. Even though they mistreated Zack Snyder and he should have been allowed to tell his arc, we are in for a very exciting DCEU future. Finally today, Secret Wars comic writer says Marvel developing live action adaptation. This is very exciting, but when you're doing Secret Wars, it's got to last a long time if you're going to do it properly. You can't do it like Civil War, I don't think anyway. Legendary comic book creator Jim Shooter reveals that a recent interaction makes him believe Marvel is developing an adaptation of Secret Wars by Richard Fink of Screen Rant. Marvel Studios is reportedly developing a movie based on the comic Secret Wars, according to writer Jim Shooter, after being forced to take a year off due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The MCU Phase 4 projects have blown the universe wide open with multiversal adventures, the appearance of a new character recruiting various characters across different stories, and new heroes joining the ever-expanding story. With so many pieces at play, one wonders how they could top the massive epic Infinity Saga, and it appears that Marvel Studios may be looking at one of their first successful comic crossovers. Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars was published as a 12-issue series published from May 1984 to April 19, 1985 to help promote a new line of Marvel superhero toys from Mattel. Written by Jim Shooter and artwork by Mike Zeck and Bob Layton, the series found various heroes and villains of the Marvel Universe transported to mysterious Battleworld by a cosmic being, the Beyonder, who wanted the various factions to fight. The series is considered Marvel Comics' first crossover event series and has been a beloved classic, having introduced many unique concepts into the Marvel Universe, like Spider-Man's black symbiote suit, the Julia Carpenter Spider-Woman, and When the Thing Stayed Behind. It led to She-Hulk becoming his replacement, on the Fantastic Four. Speaking at MegaCon convention in Orlando via CBR, Jim Shooter revealed that he thinks Marvel Studios is developing a Secret Wars movie. Shooter said he was contacted by someone at Marvel to write a novelization for Secret Wars, and when he went over the contract, it appeared to be more complicated and Shooter turned it down. David Bogart, Senior Vice President, Operations and Procurement of Publishing at Marvel Entertainment, then made a follow-up call to apologize for the contract and offered Shooter $10,000 as a new retroactive work for hire contract. Shooter asked if this meant they were making a movie, and when Bogart said he couldn't tell him that, Shooter simply replied with you just did. Yeah, it's happening and it's exciting. The fact that Marvel offered Shooter $10,000 lends us, is it 10 million or 10,000? Don't ask me, I'm illiterate. Anyway, lends a certain amount of credence. It must be 10 million, right? Companies considering a Secret Wars adaptation. Marvel typically only pays comic creators money for their work, so the fact they would offer Shooter so much implies they want to avoid any bad press for when an adaptation gets made. While it is a good sign Marvel is paying slightly more, one would imagine they could pay the creators of the material they adapt into the 1 billion tentpoles to little more. They could pay the creators of the material they adapt into 1 billion tentpoles a little more. That's true. They make a lot of money, but they want to make as much profit as possible. And unfortunately, the little guy, which is the creative, which should be the big guy, gets stabbed in the back. The pieces of Secret Wars may already be laid out. Jamelia Jamil is set to star in She-Hulk as Titiana, a character who originated in Secret Wars storyline. The multiverse action of Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness could suggest the upcoming Secret Wars may feature various heroes and villains fighting not just from the MCU, but various corners of the multiverse, including the Sony-produced films like Venom, Let There Be Carnage, or remnants from the 20th Century Fox slate, like Deadpool with the Fantastic Four entering the MCU. Secret Wars could be used to introduce Marvel's first family into the MCU. And DC are going to do the same thing with The Flash and beyond. You're going to have a meta-human war, which could lead to a multiversal war in DC live action. I think that Phase 4 is about this, is about Secret Wars, and it's not about Kang. Kang is a player, he's a manipulator, but the Secret Wars is the end game here, no pun intended. So I've read a bit of Secret Wars, I love Secret Wars, and I'd love to see it in live action. This has been Wednesday's edition of the Movies TV Mad Daily. I'm Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. I will return to you, so don't miss me too much in the next video. Until then, goodbye, au revoir.